Hi everybody. For this week with Sonic Pi, we're going to be creating drum beats using arrays inside of live loops. The aim says we're going to recreate grid drum beats. So a grid drum beat, if you ever used GarageBand or Ableton or any kind of music making program, even what we've done in things like Chrome Music Lab, those usually use a grid setup. So I'm going to show you an example of what that would look like. I'm going to go type in Google learning music. Ableton is a website made by Ableton, which is a music software company. And I'm going to go to the beats that come up here. Okay, so this is what we mean when we talk about a grid. Okay, so we have these rows of squares. So each row represents a different sound. In this case, we're making a drum beat with a kick, a clap, which would be like a snare, a closed hi-hat, and an open hi-hat. So we have 4 sounds. And if you look down here, it gives us numbers. There are 16 different squares that we have. Now this is a total of 4 beats. If you see like the 1, the 5, the 9, and 13 are sort of made a little whiter than the others. But this is, we have 4 sort of squares inside each beat. And that's a subdivision, if you remember that, when we break a beat down into smaller parts to allow us to do more intricate sort of patterns here. Okay, but the idea is I can click on a square and it will fill in a beat. Okay, and when I fill that in, if I press play, you can kind of follow, the line sort of goes over time, and it will play the sound at that point in time when it gets to it. And then I can kind of fill in. All right, so then you have sort of a beat. Okay, you can add a little more. Okay, and you can play around with that. You can fill stuff in. So maybe I'll sort of do I don't know, I'm just kind of playing around here. So let's see what. All right, so there I have a drum beat. Now I've had some experience with this, so I kind of know what to do to make it sound more traditional. You can play around with this and try and recreate this. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to take this drum beat I just made in this grid, and I'm going to recreate it in Sonic Pi using sort of a similar method, but we're going to use arrays to represent all the different beats as opposed to this grid setup. Okay, so I'm going to go back over here to Sonic Pi. So the first thing I'm going to do is make an array. Okay, so I'm going to represent all the empty squares by just a 0 in the array. So I'm going to make 16 zeros in this. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of copy and paste this 0 and square. You could type them all in if you want. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, so now I have this array. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is make a variable name for my array. So now I have this array that I can store into a variable. All right, so I can refer to my array as A. If I were to go in here and write like puts A, and then I run it, you see here it puts in the console that same thing. So A is this array filled up with zeros here. Now there's a way I can access each individual note in my array, or number in my array, or value in my array. I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a live loop. Okay, and I'll call this drum1. Remember, live loops you have to have a name from, they have a do, they also need an end. Okay, now here's the thing. We are going to need a dot times do, because we're going to be going through each value in this array, just like we have that line that goes through each square in our grid here. Okay, so first thing I need to do is however many values I have in my array, which is 16 in this case, I need to make a dot times do with that number, so 16. Okay, so end there. Now here's something we've never done before. If after the do in my dot times do block, I can use what's called a goalpost, which is just these straight things. These are right under your delete button, and you have to press shift to get those. So inside that, I'm going to make a variable name. I'm just going to call it I. You could call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it I for now, okay? Now what happens is as we go through the dot times do, as we loop through it 1, 2, 3, 4 times, all the way up to 16 times, by making this creates like a little counter, which basically keeps track of which number we are on. Is it the first time through? Is it the third time through? Is it the 10th time through? So this I will kind of keep track. And just to show, I'm going to do puts I, and then I'm just going to sleep for 1. Okay, I'm also going to right now just set the BPM to 98 just to kind of really keep things consistent with this grid that we're making. So I'm going to do use BPM 98. You can change that as you want, but just to sort of go, I'm going to get rid of this puts here. Okay, so now what we're going to see is I'm not doing anything with my array yet. I just have this I here. So every beat, we're going to see a new number come up into there. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so, and then it goes back to 0. So no, in computer programming, usually the beginning of something, it starts at 0 instead of 1. So it's 16, but you notice it gets to 15 and not 16. So the 0, everything's just kind of pushed back. It takes a little getting used to, but it's important for what we're doing. So now I have this counter. So I know at any point in time, okay, now I'm at the second, now the third, the fourth. Okay, now this is going to be important to work with our array here, okay? So I have that going. So I have my counter. Now here's how this is going to work, okay? I'm going to make sample, I'm going to do like BD house, okay? So if I were to do this, I'm just going to get that house beat playing every single time, okay? So now here's one of the things I can do here. Okay, I'm gonna write an if after this. Okay, so we're used to if. This is a conditional sort of thing, all right? This is not necessarily a full conditional statement, but if I add if after this, I can add a condition so that this will only happen, the sample will only happen if something is met. So watch this. If I is equal to, let's say, 4, okay? So if I is equal to 4, and we'll even put the counter back there so we can sort of see. So when I is equal to 4, I'll hear my sample play here. All right, so let's watch. 0, 1, 2, 3, there. Okay, so you heard it. Let's let it run through again. So this is telling me what I is equal to. Hold on. Okay, so there you see, so if I is equal to 4, and it's just going through this loop, and every time that I counter is increasing, but if I is equal to 4, I can then make this sample play, all right? So now, here is what we are going to do. I'm going to take a quick detour here to talk about arrays and when we put them in variables. Okay, if you've done, there was one lesson I did with P5JS where I talked about this and used the same diagram. So if you've seen that, hopefully this already will make sense. If not, I'm going to go through it and try and do it quickly. Okay, so I have a variable called A. So A stores these values, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values in my array. Okay, now each value has a number. That means, or what we call an index, and that is basically the order in which this happens, okay? So the index starts at 0, and then each one is given an index number. So the first value would be 0, second value is 1, third is 2, fourth is 3, fifth is 4, 6 is 5. I know that feels sort of weird and counterintuitive, like why is the second one 1, why is the first one 0? But that's just the way computer programming is set up, and we deal a lot with 0 where it represents the first value of something, okay? So I have the values, and then I have the index number of each value. Now the way I refer to that is this way, okay? So if I were to write A and then in square brackets I wrote a 0, here is my array, this is the index, okay? So if I say A0 inside these square brackets, that would be representing this number here, which is 2, okay? So A0 is 2. If I were to say what's the index of 6, how do I refer to 6 in my variable array here, which is called A? I would say A, and then I would find 6. 6 is 1, or 1, 2, 3, the third place, so the index would be 0, 1, 2, right? Now, if I were to continue down, A1 would be what's the index 1 in my array? It would be 0, 1. Okay, so 4 is index number 1 in my array. If I would say what is the index of 8 in my array, if I see 8 is here, then I would just count 0, 1, 2, 3. So I would have A, and then in these square brackets, I'd put the index 3. Okay, so these are equal. The value in the array is 8. The index of it is 3. So just as a question here, let's look. What is the value of A4? So this is telling me the index. So at what index point, what value is at the index 4? So I'd go through, well, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. Okay, so the value of A4, the index 4, would be 10. 10 is at the 4th index in my array called A. Okay, the other way, what is the index of 12? So here's 12, so I would look, okay, 12 is, this is the 0 index, the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th. Okay, so if I were to just write that real quick, A, and then I would put 5 there, because it's at the 5th index, okay? Now that is a quick sort of run through of how this works. So that feels confusing. I totally understand, but you can kind of go back and maybe watch it, but you can use these as a reference. But that is the idea, okay? So now let's go back, okay? I have my array, it's full of zeros here. So what I'm gonna do is, since I have 16 times, I'm gonna use this counter, all right? So if I is equal to, and then I'm going to put inside, okay, I'm actually going to change this slightly. I'm going to do if AI, okay, so what this does is, I'm going to change this for a minute, okay, I'm going to make that a 1. So AI, note this is always changing, so it starts at 0, so every time through it's A0, then it's A1, then it's A2, then it's A3. So what that is doing is just moving through each index in my array. Okay, now at this point everything is 0, but watch what happens here if I were to put, so we had it at 4, so I'm going to put a 1 now, so all these zeros represent like a blank square, so I'm going to use 1s to represent a spot in my array, or me like filling in a square in the grid. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to change this 0 to 1. So now it's going to tick through my array, and when it gets to index 4, it should make a sound because the 4th value, or the 4th index in my array, the value of that is 1. So that index is equal to 1. So let's see what happens here. 1. All right, so there it worked again. Okay, so just for the sake here, I can do this as well. I'm going to do AI so you can sort of see it together. So it'll give me the counter, but then it'll give me the value in the array at any given point that it's going. So here we go. Okay, so 0, 0. Okay. Okay, so it's giving me the the counter, and then it's telling me what's in my array at any given point. So here it's 0, it's always 0, but then at 4, you see the 4 has a 1 because that's this value here, all right? So with that, now I can just start putting 1s in places in my array where I want to have my beat there. So I'm going to go back to the grid that I happened for a second. Where'd you go, grid? Hopefully I didn't lose it. Okay, good. So I have one at 1, at 3, at 9, and at 14. Okay, so I'm going to put at the first one, the third one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, 11, 12, 13. Right? Oh, I don't write 13. Sorry, I just write the 1 there. So now let's go through again. Okay. So now it's going through. I'm going to make one change here. So as I said before, we have the subdivision here. So this is 4 beats, but each beat is broken up into 4 parts. So to make this more consistent, this 1 represents a beat. So I'm actually hitting 1 part in my array each beat. I'm going to make this 0.25 so that each 4 represents a beat. So it'll go faster. So here we go. All right. So now I have that. Now I could make a separate array and a separate loop for every single track. That's going to get a bit much. So I'm just going to avoid putting the same sound at the same place. So I'm just going to do one for claps and kicks here. Okay, so here I have a clap, a snare drum on the 5th one and on the 13th one. So what I'm going to do here is for every kick drum, I'm going to make it 1. For every snare drum hit, I'm going to put a 2. Okay, so 1, 1, and then I got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So it's 13 here. Okay, so I switched that up. All right, so now I'm going to copy and paste this and just make some slight changes. I'm going to change the sample now to one of the snare drum sounds. And then I'm going to say if it's 2, I'm going to make it that. So again, it's going to tick through this array. And if the value is 1, it's going to play the bass drum. If the value is 2, it's going to play the snare. Value 0, it's not going to do anything. So let's hear what we have here. And then I could go through, I could make changes, I could add a 2 or a 1 if I want to make a snare. You can use this as sort of a reference. You can kind of hear what it sounds like first, this. Okay, so now real quick, I'm going to sort of copy and paste all of this, okay? So I'm going to do 2 separate live loops right here. I'm going to have one for my kick and my snare, these 2 tracks. I'm going to have another live loop for these 2 tracks, okay? So I'm going to have to change a few things. First, I'm going to change the name of the drum loop. So that is drum 2. I'm going to make this B, so changing the array here. Okay, I'm going to change this sound to the drum closed. I'm going to change this sound to the drum. I'm not going to do the open one there. I'm actually going to do the pedal because I like the sound of that a little better. Okay, and then I change these to B. Okay, so make sure you're consistent with that. So I have a new array here, and now I'm just going to go through and double check. So I'm going to make all my 1s for this new loop, the closed hi-hat, and the 2s, the open hi-hat. Okay, so the closed 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 8. So it's quite a few. So I'm going to have to just come back. 1, 2, 3. I believe it was 5, then 7, then 9. Okay, and then it did like 2 here. Boom, boom. Okay, so there's one at the end. I'm just kind of working my way through this. Okay, so it skipped everyone there. Skip one here, and there. I think we got it. And then I have a hi-hat, open hi-hat on 4 and 13 there. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to put a 2 there. And I believe that's at 13. This is 16, 15, 14, 13. Okay. So I should be good to go here. So I should be up and running, ready to make this happen. So now let's see. First of all, let's listen to this beat. Okay, so now let's see if it worked. All right. I'm going to get rid of these puts here because I don't really need them. Just make a little smoother here. Okay, so here it is again. Okay, and again, just to go back. Okay, so there you go. So I have basically like these 2 arrays which represent the grids, these 2 tracks and these 2 tracks, and then I go through and I just add some stuff or change some stuff. So I could go maybe add 1 there, maybe add like a snare there. So I'm going to add a 1 at 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So do 1 there, and then I think I added a 2 there. Okay, I could change maybe add another 1 there, another 1 there. So add 1 here, and then like a 2 here. Okay, and then let's hear this one. So that works. So now you can just go through, you can add ones or you can add twos and play around with it. You can do the same in this array to play around with that. You could change the sound, so experiment with different samples that you want to have going on. You could make a whole nother live loop with a different array, so you're kind of adding more tracks to go on at the same time. So there's a lot you can do with this, okay? I'll try and have a reference sheet up. I don't have it now, as you probably realize this is a lot to kind of go through, and I feel like I'd prefer to just talk it through than make like a 5-page reference sheet or something, but that is the basic idea, okay? So I'm also going to try and do one more video to go with this, which talks about another concept called a spread, but may not have time, and I feel like this is enough to play around with. So when you do your project, I would say try this Learning Music Ableton with Make Beats, make your own drum grid beat, and then try and recreate that in Sonic Pi.